Hi everyone. So this is day 4 of graphing a sine and cosine function. Yesterday we talked about horizontal and vertical shifts and reflections. The period stayed the same in every problem, so that's the one thing we're going to really focus on today is that period change. So we're really going to do everything today. We're going to talk about how to shift it left and right, up and down, how to graph a reflection, and how to graph when you have a period change. Okay? So just as a quick reminder, if we're talking about a sine function, remember that a sine function starts on your midline, and then it will go up, down, and then it'll come back to where it started. Okay? If your sine function is a reflection, then reflecting it at the origin, it still stays the same. So it stays on your midline, but instead of going up, it would go down, come up, and then come back. So that would be the reflection of sine. Okay? If we're talking about a cosine function starts at your extremum. So it typically starts at your maximum, and then it goes down and comes back up to your maximum. However, if we have a cosine function that's been reflected, then it's going to start at your other extremum. So instead of your maximum, it starts at your minimum, and then it goes up to the maximum, back down to the minimum. Okay? Alright, let's go through a bunch of problems. So just like we did yesterday, we're going to find all the relevant information listed, and we're going to graph 2 cycles of each function, and we're going to make sure that we label both our x and our y axis. If you have a highlighter or a colored pen, it would be helpful for today as we start shifting. Okay, so looking at this problem, we're talking about sine. Notice that this part right here is in parentheses. That means that it is getting shifted to the right. Notice that this is our amplitude, notice that this is our B value, and notice that this is what shifts us up and down. Okay, so I'm going to write above this. It'll help us actually with what we have to do tomorrow. So this is A times sine of B times x plus or minus C plus or minus D. So this is the equation of a sine function. A is your amplitude. The B value is what helps us find our period, so it's 2. The plus or minus C is what moves us left or right, and then that plus or minus D is what moves us up or down. Okay, so in this case, our amplitude is 4. The equation of our midline is y equals 1. It's always this value right here. Okay, our period is found by doing 2 pi over b. In this case, our b is 2, since that's what would get multiplied to our x value. So 2 pi divided by 2 is just pi. So our frequency is 1 over pi, which means that there will be 1 cycle for every pi. Okay. Our phase shift is to the right, since negative is opposite, which would be positive. So to the right, pi over 4. Our range, I'm going to come back to when we graph. Our spacing, we want to take our period of pi, and remember, we want to always multiply by a fourth. We're breaking that up into fourths. So that just gives me a spacing of pi over 4. Okay, so I go to my graph. The nice part with this is the phase shift. I move to the right pi over 4, and my spacing is pi over 4. So those being the same values are very nice. Then I don't have to worry about adding a common denominator. Okay, so instead of starting at 0, I'm going to start at pi over 4. So I'm going to start right here, and then every jump that I do has to be the exact same as that. So I'm going to kind of try to figure this. I'm going to try to do the best I can with spacing. So this space, then I want to recreate and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can see I didn't do a very good job of using most of my space, so I'm actually going to erase it. I'm going to start over, and I'm going to say, okay, what if I use this much space? And I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's much better. Okay. So again, remember, it's 8 jumps from where you start. So from here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. I have to go up 1, so I'll call this 1. And then from here, I need to go up and down 4. So if that's 1, 2, 3, call this then about 4. If I go down 4, I'm at negative 3. So 1, 2, and probably about here, do negative 3. Okay. My spacing, so this is pi over 4 is my first move. That's my phase shift, and then I go pi over 4. So then this would be 2 pi over 4. 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, so just pi, 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 2, 7 pi over 4, 8 pi over 4, which is 2 pi, and 9 pi over 4. Okay, we should be simplifying, but like I said yesterday, we had a lot going on yesterday to simplify. I'm going to simplify this though right here. So that was 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. Okay, I'm going to draw in my lines. So this right here is my maximum. This is my midline. And then this is my minimum. Okay, and then those are the 3 places that my function will hit. Since this is a sine function, it will start at my midline, but remember it's got to start at that pi over 4. Don't start on the y-axis. It's not reflected, so I'm going to go up. Actually, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. I should end up here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I should end up here. So I'm going to go up, back down, all the way down. Puts me there. And then just keep repeating that process. Connect your points. Make sure that your function doesn't look like it's got a V to it at all. It should be U-shaped. And that's what your function looks like. Okay? My range goes from -3 up to 4. Alright? Okay, let's try again. Go ahead and pause it if you need to look at any of this. Okay, so number 2, we're going to deal with the cosine function. Notice it's reflected. It's also moved. If you want to pause this at any point and work through the problem on your own and then kind of check in, that's a good idea. Okay, that way you're not listening to me explain each time. Alright, our amplitude, remember, cannot be negative. So our amplitude is a +3. The equation of my midline is y equals -2. My period is 2 pi divided by, notice that there's a 4 that's being distributed to the x, so that's my b value. That simplifies to pi over 2, which means my frequency is 2 over pi, so there'll be 2 cycles every pi. My phase shift this time is going to be to the left, pi over 2. My range I'm going to come back to. My spacing, I'm going to take pi over 2 and I'm going to multiply it by 1/4, which gives me pi over 8. Okay, now this one's interesting. I actually changed the graph for you on this one because I'm going to go left pi over 2, and then my spacing is pi over 8. So if I think about this as a fraction, if I go left a half, and then I go, every jump I go an eighth, I'm actually going more on my first jump than I am on every jump. So my phase shift is larger than my jump, okay? If you think about how many eighths it takes to get back to a half, there would be 4 of them. So think I would have 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, and 1/8. That means I would have 1 hop, 2, 3, 4, which makes 4/8, which is 1/2. And that's what I'm moving. So what I want to do with this one is actually I want to kind of try to move here and say that, okay, that's negative pi over 2. And then I want to go, so watch what I can do. I can say that this is where I want to end up. I can cut this in half and this in half and this in half, and notice what happens. I'm going to go 1 jump, 2 jumps, 3 jumps, 4 jumps. That's an eighth, an eighth, an eighth, and an eighth, which means that I'm back to my 0. And then I can continue this and say that same distance 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Like I said, it's pretty close to the same. Okay, so if I'm at negative pi over 2 and I want to add pi over 8, my common denominator is 8, so I have negative 4 pi over 8 plus pi over 8, and I'm going to keep adding this every time. Then that puts me at negative 4 pi plus pi is negative 3 pi. So this will be negative 3 pi over 8. Add another pi over 8 makes this negative 2 pi over 8 and negative pi over 8. Add another one, I get to 0. Add another pi over 8, I get to 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8, 3 pi over 8, and 4 pi over 8, which is just pi. Okay. So it works out nice symmetrically. I'm going to go down 2, and then I have to go up and down 3. So down 2 because of this, and then up and down 3 because of my amplitude. So I'm going to say that this is my down 2, so that's negative 2. And then that distance, if I want to go 3 from there, I just need to go further, so I'm going to call this 3. If I go up 3 from here, then this is 1. Alright, so here's my maximum. Here's my midline. Here's my minimum. Decided okay with spacing. Alright, graph my points. This is a cosine function, but it has been reflected. So when I start here, instead of being at my maximum, I'm actually all the way down at my minimum. I'm going to count 4 spaces and then end up in the same place. So 1, 2, 3, 4 puts me here. 1, 2, 3, 4 puts me here. Okay, so then from here, the next tick mark, I go up and up further, come down, and then back here. And then I go up and up further and down, and there we go. Connect your points. And there's your function. Should be half on the left side, half on the right side of your y-axis. Your spacing is, this should be negative 3. Your spacing is from negative 3 to 1. Remember, I could check that very easily. From negative 3 to 1 is 4. Oh, I definitely counted this wrong. Sorry. This would be negative 5. So that's a good reason to check your work, because that's definitely wrong. Alright, let's erase this. So then this should be negative 5 to 1. If I look at the distance from negative 5 to 1, it's 6, and half of that is my amplitude of 3. Alright, so go ahead and pause this if you need to look back at it. Otherwise, flip over to the back side. There are 2 problems on the back, so this is, again, a good place to pause and try the problem on your own. And then you can fast forward through to see what the end graph looks like, or if you want to hear any explanation of a part, unpause it and listen to it. Okay? So let's see. We have an amplitude of 5, not negative. Our midline is y equals negative 4 because of this line right here. Our period is going to be 2 pi divided by, alright, in this case it's a little bit harder to, well, our period's not too hard to see because we can see that it's pi over 4 because that's the factor of x. So we can divide this by pi over 4. If we multiply by the reciprocal, we'll have 2 pi over 1 times 4 over pi. So you can see that our pi's cancel, leaving us with 2 times 4 is 8. The frequency then is the reciprocal, so 1 over 8. So it's kind of nice when you end up with no pi's. Okay, so here's the hard part. Well, harder part we have to pay attention to. When we talk about the phase shift, we don't want to just look at this pi and say that it's right pi, because it's really not. We actually want to take this and we want to factor it. So meaning that when we factor, our b value has to be outside. So we want to factor out the pi over 4 so that it's just x minus something. In order to be a phase shift, it has to be x plus or minus something, not a pi over 4x. Okay? Well, if I factor out a pi over 4, I want to then know what do I put here times pi over 4 leaves me with a pi. Well, remember, factoring is just division. So it's saying that I have a pi in here, and I want to take out a pi over 4. So I'm going to divide this by pi over 4, which means I'm going to do pi over 1 times the reciprocal, and that's what leaves me then with 4. So that means that this is a 4. Okay, and you can check your work, you should. If we have pi over 4 times negative 4, the 4's would cancel, leaving me with a negative pi, which is what that's leaving me with. So we can see now that x minus 4 means that my phase shift would be to the right 4, so not to the right pi, which is an easy mistake to make. Okay, my range I'm going to come back to. My period is 8 times 1/4. 8 divided by 4, my spacing is 2. Okay, so my spacing actually is pretty easy in this case because I'm going to, taking away pi's are nice, it's whole numbers, not fractions. So I need to go to the right 4, and my spacing is 2. So I'm actually just going to number everything as 2's. So I'm not even going to start at 4. I'm going to actually just go start at 0. So we'll call this 0. And I'm going to go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. And I'm going to see how many jumps it is. So notice that I would go 2, so this is 0, 2, 4. This is where I'd start. So from here I have to jump 8 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this would be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20. Okay, so I'm not going to graph anything at 0 and 2, but it's nice to help me get a good spacing and make sure that it's consistent. Okay, all right, so we need to go down 4 to our midline, and then up and down 5. So down 4. So we'll call this down 4. And then down 5 from there means about the same distance, a little bit more. So if I go down 5 from here, now I'm at -9. If I go up 5 from here, I'm at 1. That 1. Okay. Here is my maximum. Ooh, that's hard to see. Do this. Yeah. All right, let's go back to yellow. All right, so here's my maximum. My midline. And my minimum. Okay. All right, so I need to start on 4, and on that value, I need to be, let's see, we're talking about sine, and sine is always in the middle, so I'm going to be right here. Now it is reflected, so I'm going to make a note here that says reflected. Oops. Reflected. So because it's reflected, instead of going up, I'm going to actually go down. I'm going to count from here. Okay, so we're going to go down. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is at where I should finish. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's where I should finish. So I'm going to go down, back up, which brings me back down to here. And then I'm going to go down, back up, which brings me back down. Connect your points. There we go. Okay, don't forget to identify your range. Your range is going from -9 to 1. I'm going to double check since I already made a mistake with that to make sure it's right. That's a total distance of 10. Half of that's 5, which is my amplitude. Okay. Okay, last one. This should be a really good point if you haven't yet to pause it, try it, and then come back and maybe check your work. Okay, our amplitude is 6. The equation of my midline is y equals 2. My period is 2 pi divided by the number that is being multiplied by x, which is pi over 6. So that means this would be 2 pi over 1 times 6 over pi. So I got a lot going on here. My pi's are going to cancel. 2 times 6 gives me 12. So that's kind of nice. Anytime you have numbers, it's much easier than fractions in pi. My frequency, 1 cycle for every 12. So 1 over 12. Before I talk about my phase shift, I want to make sure that I'm going to draw a line here to separate. I want to make sure I factor out, otherwise it's going to look like the wrong phase shift. So if I factor out at pi over 6, it means I need to take pi over 3, and I need to divide by pi over 6. Okay, which means I want to multiply by the reciprocal, so 6 over pi. Okay, remember, anytime you divide, you factor out. So let me show you an example. If you had something like 2x plus 14, and I want to factor out, when I'm dividing when I factor. So that's why I'm doing a 2, and I'd be left with 14 divided by 2 is 7. Okay, division. That's what we're doing here. We're dividing out of pi over 6, so we're taking pi over 3, and we're dividing by pi over 6. Okay. So let's see what I'm left with. So the pi's cancel. 6 over 3 is 2. Okay, I'm actually going to move this so it's out of the way. This put over here. Alright, so I'm left with a 2. So then that means that this, and I'm going to always rewrite this, that means that this is 6 cosine of pi over 6 times x plus 2 plus 2. Okay, and notice I'm going to check my answer. If I have pi over 6 times pi over 2, so if I multiply this to double check, I get 2 pi over 6, which simplifies to that pi over 3, which is perfect. Anytime you factor, check your work. Okay? So because that's a plus 2 in there, that means that I'm going left 2. So you can see that when it started, I thought it was left pi over 3. Very different numbers. Okay? So make sure you factor out. My range I'm going to come back to. My spacing is 12 times 1/4. 12 divided by 4. My spacing is 3. Okay? So numbers are always nice. Alright, so I need to make a jump to the left 2, but then my spacing is 3, which is, you know, kind of different. So let's see. Alright, so my jump to the left is smaller than my initial jump, so I'm going to make this 2. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to number everything as 2 and then go back and figure out my spacing. So if this is left 2, which is -2, then that means that this is my first jump, which is 0. Okay, so I need to make 8 jumps. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Not a great job with the spacing. I kind of left a lot of room here. So since I have this ability, I'm going to erase it and actually start over. I'm going to make this my -2 and then this my jump. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And notice that now I'm using much more space. Alright, so this is -2. This is 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Okay, now the problem is though that my spacing is 3. So I'm actually going to go back in here and I'm going to say, okay, well then this is 1, this is 3, and if I go back and hit all these, this is actually where I'm going to number. So this would be 1, this would be 3, this would be 5, 7, 9, 11. You don't have to space it this way. I just like consistency in my numbering, and I like the fact that everything is spaced the same. So that's how I'm going to do this. Okay, now I do need to pay attention to what numbers, which ones I'm using. So I'm actually going to be here, and then jumping 3 means 1, 2, here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Run out of space here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh man, I ran out of space. Okay, sorry, I ran out of space. I didn't consider the fact that I was going over 3. I was counting 2. So let's see if I can fix this. I'm going to kind of fill in all the way to the end. So if I extend this line right here, let's see. So I'm going to extend this line. So I'm going to go add a tick mark, 1, tick mark, tick mark. Okay, so that makes this 15, 16, 17, 18. So 1. So every 3 I'm putting a tick mark. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, right at the end here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I definitely landed short. Sorry, guys. I can do this much easier than you, unfortunately. So I'm actually going to move. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm just going to start over. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm actually going to go back to the numbering that I had, which was much closer together. So I'm going to make this -2. And then I'm going to jump. Okay? So maybe I'm actually just going to... I thought that would be easier. Sorry, it wasn't. So that's 0. If I jump from here and I go to 3, then that puts me at 1. So that means that this spacing right there would be 1. So half of this. And then if you notice that this big spacing is my 1 jump. So that's what I'm going to create. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if I'm at -3, I'm sorry, if I'm at -2 and I jump 3, then that puts me to 1. If I jump 3, that puts me to 4. 3 more, 7, 10, 13, 3 more, 16, 19, and 22. Sorry, I thought I was making it easier. I definitely made it harder. Alright, so then let's go, and we need to go up 2, and then we need to go up and down 6 from there. So I'm going to make this 2, and then if I go up 6, so if that's 2, 4, 6, it'll be about here. So this is 2, up 6 puts me at 8. That same distance would put me about here. Okay, so if I go down 6 from here, I'm at -4. Draw my lines in. Alright, here's my maximum. Here's my midline. And my minimum. Okay, you can see that the spacing between looks pretty similar. Alright, so let's plot my points. Cosine starts at a maximum, and there is no reflection, so it does start at a maximum. Remember, I'm starting at -2, so that means I'm starting all the way up here. When I jump 4 times, I need to be back there. So when I jump 1, 2, 3, 4, I have to be back up there, and when I jump 1, 2, 3, 4 again, I have to be back up there. Okay, so my next tick mark would be here. Make sure it's on the midline and not on your x-axis. Okay, and then that's one cycle. This would be my next cycle. There we go. Connect, make sure that you go curl around your maximums and your minimums. Make sure you have arrows. Double check to see that your function looks like this. And you should be good. Your range goes from -4 all the way up to 8. The distance between -4 to 8 is 12, and half of that is 6, so I know I'm good. Alright, pause and take a look at any of these problems if you need to. Let's go down to the bottom and just talk about a summary. So we've talked now about both your cosine and your sine functions. These are your standard. This is what you need to be in. Remember, you always want to factor out this b so that you have the correct phase shift to a c and d. So always factor out your b to help you with your c. Alright, some things that we've been talking about. An amplitude is non-negative. A negative implies reflection across the x-axis. So if your amplitude looks negative, it is not, but it's just talking about the fact that you have a reflection. Okay? Your period is found by doing 2 pi over b. It's the time it takes for the graph to complete one cycle. A frequency is the reciprocal. It indicates how often a function repeats. Your phase shift is your c value. It's to the right or to the left. If you have a positive c value, it means you go to the left, whereas if you have a negative c value, it means you go to the right, so opposite. Your d value is your vertical shift, up or down. So if you have a positive d value, then that means that you go up. If you have a negative d value, then it means you go down. Okay, it's also the equation of your midline. Alright, your homework. Let's see. Your homework is worksheet number 10. The sub will give you the worksheet. You have a bunch of problems similar to what we just did. So you have 1, 2, 3 on the front, and another 3 in the back. Okay, so it should be plenty of practice. Tomorrow we will start talking about how you write the equation given the graph. Alright, be working on your quizzes. Make sure that you are fixing any mistakes that you had, or you are finding the mistakes that you made. Alright, have a good rest of your day, everyone.